What is up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another gruesome Get Ready With Me video. Man, I really freaked some of you guys out this past couple of weeks not doing makeup in these videos, did I not? I apologize for that, but I will tell you right here, right now, that unless I ever explicitly state in like a sit down video that gruesome Get Ready With Me's are done and that I'm going back to just traditional true crime content, please know that I don't have any plans for it to go anywhere. I had a very hectic couple of weeks, so it was just much more conducive to my life to sit down and already have everything done and taken care of so I could just focus on filming. But as of this week, we're back to makeup, we're back to Get Ready With Me's. We're all good. Again, I apologize for the fear that I sparked into your hearts, but we're here today. We're doing a gruesome Get Ready With Me. We're all good.
That escalated quickly.
If this is your first time seeing my face and you don't have any idea what the absolute hell any of that was about, my name is Jessica, and in each of these videos, I sit down here with you guys and we discuss a different true crime case whilst I put on some makeup. So if that sounds fun to you, I'd say subscribe, stick around, and join me back here each week. If the combination isn't for you, I've got some links down in the description, but for those of you who are sticking around, let's go ahead and get into today's case. September 1978 in Modesto, California, 15-year-old Mary Vincent was desperate for a fresh start. Exhausted from weeks of traveling, she found herself thumbing a ride along a quiet stretch of California highway when a stranger pulled over and offered her said ride. Now, this man seemed harmless. He seemed like your regular old run-of-the-mill older gentleman just looking to help this young girl out. So Mary accepted this ride. And at first, things seemed fine. Everything truly was fine until it wasn't. Before she knew it, Mary found herself fighting for her life in a way that I don't think anyone could prepare themselves for. But even bloodied, beaten, and left for dead, Mary still managed to summon a strength that stunned investigators and transfixed the nation. Against impossible odds, Mary drug herself from the edge of not just a ravine, but she drug herself to safety from the brink of death. And while her survival has become a symbol of resilience, her case would also expose deep flaws in the American justice system. How could the monster who had done this to Mary manage to slip through the cracks and go on to do the unthinkable yet again? This is the story of Mary Vincent and Lawrence Singleton, a story of survival and injustice that exposes the terrifying truth of what happens when the system drops the ball. All right, so as mentioned in the intro, today's story brings us all the way to the sunny West Coast to Modesto, California. Resting on 45 square miles of land and located in the heart of California's Central Valley, Modesto, California currently hosts a population of just shy of 220,000 people. Surrounded by some of the most fertile farmlands in the state, Modesto is certainly well known for its agricultural roots. It's also well known as the birthplace of George Lucas. So if you're a Star Wars fan, you have Modesto to thank for that. However, if you're not into the Star Wars of it all, visitors can also catch a show at the historic State Theater, stroll through McHenry Mansion, or unwind at Graceada Park. Basically, given its blend of old school Americana paired with newer and more modern touches, Modesto appears to offer a unique snapshot of California's small city spirit. Bear in mind, though, that is modern day Modesto. At the time our story takes place, Modesto's population was actually about half of what it is today. And actually, if you'd really like a glimpse into what the city was like back then, back in the 70s, you could really immerse yourself in the culture and you could watch through George Lucas's American Graffiti. Influenced by local car clubs and the cruising culture, American Graffiti is apparently heavily based on Lucas's own experiences growing up in Modesto throughout that time frame. That said, though, yes, we are going to end up in Modesto for a majority of the story that gathers us here today. But before that, we do first have to take a small jaunt just 500 miles southeast of Modesto to good old Sin City. Mary Belle Vincent was born in 1963 in Las Vegas, Nevada, to her parents Lucy and Herb. The couple had met when Herb was in the military and Lucy was working as a blackjack dealer. She was working at a local casino at the time. And while I don't know their exact love story, I think we can all kind of put the pieces together and imagine how it would have played out. Honestly, the only really important takeaway is that following his service, Herb got a job working as a mechanic, and he and Lucy then settled down together and they built themselves quite a family. Mary was one of 7 children born to the couple, and growing up, those who knew her described her as remarkably creative, and they described her as having an artistic streak that was very difficult to ignore. On top of that, she was also incredibly athletic, and she was an incredibly skilled dancer with dreams of someday hopefully turning that into her full-time career. Another word that I saw used to describe Mary a lot was independent. She was very self-sufficient, and she was determined and resourceful in ways that, until push came to shove, I don't even know that she knew that she could be. Sadly, though, despite how happy and secure in herself Mary was, her home life was less than desirable. Eventually, for Herb and Lucy, the pressures of marriage and supporting this family and juggling their jobs, it just all really started to get to them, and it really began to take a toll on their marriage. They began fighting constantly, which, speaking from my own lived experiences, that is so unbelievably stressful for the children that are forced to witness these fights and to live through this chaos. And so, feeling every bit of this at just 15 years old, tired of living with so much turmoil at home, Mary decided that she couldn't do it anymore. In 1978, she officially ran away from home with plans to hitchhike her way from Las Vegas to her uncle's house near Santa Cruz, and ultimately then to her grandfather's house in Los Angeles. And while today, hitchhiking at best seems bold and reckless, and at worst, just stupid and downright dangerous, back then, especially in California, it was super common. And so for Mary, too young to drive herself, but eager to escape her family's tumultuous life and determined to find some sense of her own belonging, it seemed like as good an option as any. I mean, it wasn't an easy or seamless journey, let me tell you. While she did stay with family during some stints along the way, almost just as frequently as she had a roof over her head, Mary found herself sleeping outside, either tucked behind trash cans, or even sometimes she would seek shelter in some random person's unlocked car. Again, it sounds horrifying to us nowadays, but back then, things really were just so different. Now, Mary did eventually make it to her grandpa's house in LA. I believe she was with him for maybe a couple of weeks. I couldn't really find clarification on exactly how long she stayed with him, but regardless of how long it actually was, what I know for sure is that it was just long enough for Mary to really start to feel extremely homesick. You know, the grass had seemed like it would be so much greener in California without all the stress and the chaos that her family was currently going through. But when push came to shove, Mary was still just a 15-year-old girl. After taking her breather and seeing what the real world had to offer her, at the end of the day, she really just wanted to go back home. She missed her parents, she missed her friends, she missed her siblings. You know, she had had her adventure and now it was time to head home. And so, just like she had done to get to California, of course, Mary was planning on hitchhiking her way all the way back to Vegas. However, sadly though, this time around, things would not play out even sort of smoothly. And that is because it was, well, making her way back home that Mary would cross paths with one of just the most evil men that this world has ever had the misfortune of churning out. And regretfully, my friends, that does indeed bring us to the evening of September 29th, 1978. All in all, Mary had about a cool 300 miles, give or take, that she had to try to make it in order to hitchhike from LA all the way back to Vegas. Mind you, though, that's if you're taking the fastest possible route. The problem with hitchhiking, though, among many other things, but as far as the time it's going to take, is that you're probably not going to end up with any sort of straight shot to your destination. You're at the mercy of where or how far whomever you end up hitching a ride with is willing to take you. And at this point, Mary's made it from LA all the way back up north to Berkeley. And so far, this particular leg of her journey was going relatively smoothly. Honestly, I think you could almost say that it had been fun. She had made some acquaintances along the way. She had scored a few different rides with a few different really nice people. Like I said, so far, so good. However, on this evening in particular, all of that would change. In an effort to make it out of Berkeley and to proceed further on her journey, Mary ultimately found herself standing and thumbing a ride at a spot in California known as Hitchhiker's Corner. Hitchhiker's Corner was a specific spot on the campus of the University of California at Berkeley, where, as I'm sure you could ascertain, young people tended to gather in hopes of hitching a ride. So at the time, it's important to note that Mary was both in a densely populated area and she was surrounded by multiple other young people who were all doing the exact same thing that she was. All these kids were just looking for a ride. And while Mary and these other kids were waiting there and waiting for a ride, they all eventually got to talking, likely just to kill time. And it didn't take them long to realize that, coincidentally, they all happened to be heading in the same direction. And at first, this seemed great because eventually a large van pulled up and the driver offered to take Mary where she needed to go. And so because the rest of them were all heading in the same direction, initially, they kind of just assumed that they could all pile in this van as well. I mean, it's a van, right? Surely they could all fit, because from where they were standing, the driver seemed to be alone. There didn't seem to be anything taking up the back seats. So Mary slung open the door and she climbed in. However, as the other hitchhikers made a motion as if they were going to climb in as well, the driver of the van immediately rejected the rest of them. He told them that Mary was fine, but that he didn't want any more than just one person coming along in his van because he claimed that he didn't have enough room, which was definitely weird because, as I previously mentioned, it was a van, a large, empty van. So right away, the other people that Mary had been standing and talking to, they looked at her like, girl, do not get in that van. They didn't know what this guy's deal was. They didn't know what was going on, but they could definitely feel that like the vibes were off. But Mary, doing like her own vibe check, she didn't really see a problem taking this ride and proceeding along her route with this man alone. Nothing about him really stood out to her. Like, he didn't seem dangerous or scary or anything like that. Honestly, more than anything, to her, he seemed like your friendly old grandpa type. And maybe that's why he didn't want a bunch of people in his van. Maybe because he's old and frail. Maybe he was apprehensive to be alone and at the mercy of this group of young strangers. That's definitely something to take into account, is that hitchhiking can potentially be every bit as dangerous for the driver as it can be for the rider. Just like you as the rider, you have no idea whose car you're climbing into. Conversely, the driver also has no idea whom they're letting climb into their car. So yeah, alarm bells are blaring in our ears right now hearing this. But Mary, in that moment, it really didn't seem like that big of a deal to her. So she smiled at her fellow hitchhikers. She gave them like a wave, and just like that, she and this man, they were off. But who exactly was this man? Well, Lawrence Bernard Singleton was born on July 28th, 1927 in Tampa, Florida. Growing up, he was one of, I believe, 9 children that were born to his parents, Albert and Lena Mae Singleton. From what I was able to gather, it looks like he lived in Florida for a majority of his upbringing, but beyond that, I really couldn't find much information regarding like what his family dynamic was or what his relationship to his parents was. I really couldn't find anything about his earlier years. More or less, all I really know about this man is that after briefly serving in the military, he then went on to become a merchant marine, which, contrary to how it sounds, is actually not part of like the Navy or the Marines or even any branch of the United States military. Now, in times of war or natural emergencies, the government can like draft merchant marines to help aid in things like transporting troops or transporting supplies, but technically speaking, being a merchant marine is a civilian job. So Lawrence spent a lot of time at sea on these different ships. Think like container ships or oil tankers or like big cargo vessels. Beyond that, based off of his Ancestry.com family tree, it looks like he was married and divorced quite a few times. But other than that, that's about all I could find on Larry. Well, at least outside of what we're gathered here today to talk about. So looping it back around then to the actual story, Mary and Lawrence, they drive off from Hitchhiker's Corner. Mary, young and naive, she feels totally cool about this whole situation. Of course, the two of them talked a little as they drove. Lawrence actually told Mary that he had a daughter right around her age, which was another thing that effectively kind of put her at ease with this man. Because you really don't expect that someone is going to hurt you if you remind them of someone that they love, right? So they're cruising along. Things are going more or less exactly as Mary had expected them to, right up until she fell asleep for a little bit. Remember, this poor girl had been hitchhiking and traveling and living on the streets and in strangers' cars for weeks at this point. She was exhausted, and it was all she could do to keep her eyes open for the past few days. So now finally, feeling as though she was making progress in getting home and feeling like she didn't have anything else to worry about right now, finally, Mary fell asleep. And unfortunately, it was when she woke up from this little nap that everything about this journey took a turn for the worst. As soon as Mary woke up and as soon as her eyes adjusted and she got her bearings, she very quickly noticed that the road signs, they were no longer heading south like she had been wanting to go. Rather, all the signs that Mary could see now indicated to her that they were going in the complete opposite direction of where she had asked this man to take her. And she clocked this right away. And she had no problem voicing her concerns out loud about the situation. She bravely looked at Lawrence and she told him, like, look, you're going the wrong way. I think you know you're going the wrong way and you need to turn this van around right now. And hearing this, bro, I got mad respect for Mary because I'm 33 and I just know that my neurodivergent, people-pleasing ass would have been like,
excuse me, sir, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you might be going the wrong way. If I am wrong, please don't hesitate to just, like, back over me with your van when I get out for inconveniencing you.
Yeah, I'm feisty on camera, but in real life, I'm not so good with the confrontation. So again, mad props to Mary for standing up for herself and for having the guts to call this man out on being shady and weird. Now, of course, Lawrence tried to play this off. He tried to act like he had simply made an innocent mistake and that because he was old and just so silly, you know, he had gotten himself turned around. And he assured her that just because they were going in the wrong direction, it wasn't for like a nefarious reason or anything like that. Again, he was just a simple-minded old man and he had gotten confused. Thankfully, though, Mary was not buying this act. For the first time since she had gotten in this man's car, it dawned on her that she might not have made the best decision in trusting this man. Because he was acting really weird now. He wasn't driving her in the direction that she'd asked him to. Just Suddenly everything started feeling really off and really ominous. And to make matters worse, just as Mary was starting to come to terms with these feelings and these fears, Lawrence started to pull over the van, which understandably made Mary's stomach drop. As he pulled over and off down this deserted dirt road, Mary's heart was beating out of her chest. Now, he had told her that he was just pulling over to pee quickly and that then he was going to turn the van back around and that he was going to start heading in the right direction. But again, Mary was not buying this. Her adrenaline was pumping. And like I said, her heart was racing. She was sitting, but she could barely catch her breath. She didn't know exactly what it was, but something inside of her was telling her that she was about to have to try to run for her life. And so as she is assessing the situation and she's looking outside and she's trying to decide where she is going to run to, she's doing her best to familiarize herself with how she is going to quickly get her seatbelt off and get the car door open and get away. All of a sudden, that is when she realizes that her shoelace had come untied. Obviously, this put her in quite the predicament. A floppy shoelace is not conducive for potentially running for your life. So as nonchalantly as she possibly could, Mary slowly bent down and she was intending to tie it. Sadly though, Mary wouldn't actually end up getting the chance to try to run away, because it was while she was hunched over and trying to tie her shoelace that Lawrence Singleton stopped the car. And he took this opportunity that Mary's guard was down, and he hit her over the head with a sledgehammer, causing her to immediately lose consciousness. And poor Mary. When she did finally come back to, believe it or not, things only proceeded to get so much worse. Yes, worse than being bludgeoned over the head with a sledgehammer. Pretty much as soon as Mary opened her eyes, Lawrence began repeatedly sexually assaulting her in pretty much any and every way that you could possibly imagine. Multiple times over the course of, God, I honestly don't even really know exactly how long, but this man bound and restrained Mary, and he proceeded to have his way with her close to 10 different times. Of course, throughout this entire ordeal, Mary was crying and she was screaming and she was begging him to stop, just pleading with him and asking him why he was doing this to her. But the entire time, Lawrence just stayed silent. He was stone-faced. He never responded to her, and he was almost creepily stoic through this whole ordeal. And remember, poor Mary, she is 15 years old at this point. This is hands down, without a doubt, the worst thing that she has ever experienced. I mean, it would probably be the worst thing that anyone at any age would ever experience. But for someone so young, it was inconceivable to Mary how she was ever going to get past this, or how she was even going to make it through this. And honestly, given what this man had done to her and what she had already experienced, she actually started to hope that she wouldn't make it through this. During parts of this attack, Mary actually hoped and prayed that Lawrence would kill her, because she could not stomach the idea of going through anything else, or with having to live with the memories and the trauma of the fact that this had happened. And when he was done attacking her and when he was done assaulting her, this sick freak quite literally just laid down in the van and he passed out. Meanwhile, Mary is still tied up. She is wishing that she was dead, just stuck there listening to this disgusting man who had just done all of these reprehensible things to her. He was just sleeping there peacefully, like it had all just, it was no big deal. Mary, on the other hand, she didn't sleep a wink that night. She just laid there, broken and quietly sobbing and begging for Lawrence to let her go, for him to set her free. When he finally woke up, again, Mary promised him that she wouldn't tell anyone what he had done, and she just begged him that she wanted him to, quote, set her free. And remember that wording, because it becomes very important here in a minute. But no matter what Mary did or what she said, unsurprisingly, Lawrence was less than moved. Instead, as the sun started to peek in through the van windows, he grabbed Mary and he pulled her out of the van. Remember, they're in the middle of nowhere, isolated back on this dirt road, surrounded by pretty much nothing. But still, being there with this man out in the open, naked and battered and bleeding, it was the most vulnerable and exposed and unprotected that Mary had ever felt. And once he had her, I guess, what he deemed far enough away from his van and from the road, that is when Lawrence looked at Mary ominously and he said to her, "Okay, you want me to set you free? I'll set you free." And then he pulled out a hatchet, and this lunatic then proceeded to swing it down onto Mary's left arm. And this happened so fast. Please understand that. I know it's easy to follow and to process here, rehashing it, but when this happened to Mary, she very much did not process what was happening until she began falling backwards away from Lawrence. This man had cut Mary's left arm clean off, and this just so happened to be the arm that he was dragging her by. So when he took it off, like I said, she started to fall backwards. And instinctively, as she's falling, she reached out and she tried to catch herself, and she ended up grabbing onto Lawrence's arm, trying to brace herself. However, pretty much exactly at the moment that she got her hand wrapped around his arm, that is when he took another swing of his hatchet. And again, Mary then found herself falling backwards. And this time, she honestly could not understand how she was falling, because she had grabbed his arm. She had felt it when she had grabbed it. She had grabbed on tight, so she should not be falling. So she looks down, and that is when she realized that her right arm was now also no longer attached to her body. And grotesquely, as Mary hit the ground, she looked up and she saw Lawrence violently shaking his arm around. And at first she couldn't figure out what he was doing, but then all of a sudden it all made sense to her. When he had cut off her right arm, her hand had somehow managed to stay contracted around his arm. So when Mary looked up and she saw Lawrence just shaking his arm around, it was because he was literally trying to get her severed arm to release from his arm. These are truly the cases that make me thankful that I have aphantasia, because the thought of being able to vividly picture something like this, that would make me physically ill. I can't imagine what it was like for Mary having to live it, for her to be lying there in excruciating pain, feeling her blood coursing out of her body through these two massive wounds. And all the while, here this sick freak is shaking off one of her body parts like he had just stepped in mud or something. Genuinely, the man is deranged. How someone could have this kind of disregard for human life or for the human body in general is just nauseating to me. And as if everything that he has done up to this point wasn't abhorrent enough, this man was still not done desecrating and disrespecting Mary and her body as if she was subhuman. As Mary was lying there, naked in the middle of the dirt, screaming and crying and writhing in pain from having just had her arms hacked off, Lawrence then grabbed her and he dragged her to the edge of a nearby ravine, and then he threw her off the side of this 30-foot cliff, more or less. And I think at this point, we can all agree, he's done enough. Just let the girl be. My God. But even with all that he had already done, he still was not quite finished yet. Instead, once he had thrown Mary over this cliff, he then carefully made his own way down the cliff to her, just so that he could then ensure that she was covered and that no one would be able to find her or see her or help her. Actually, what he ended up doing was shoving her into this like nearby culvert sort of thing. Basically, it was like a big concrete pipe type thing. He took Mary, this innocent 15-year-old girl, and he shoved her in this pipe, thinking that she would die there and that if she was ever found, he'd be long gone. Remember, it's the 70s, so if he can successfully distance himself, there really wasn't much that they could use forensically to tie him to this case beyond trace evidence, like fiber comparison. So essentially, he figured that he would shove her in this culvert. It would give him time to get the hell out of Dodge, to get as far as he possibly could away from her. And then, as far as he was concerned, Mary could rot in that pipe for all he cared. So he shoved her in it. He made his way back up the ravine, and he got in his van and he drove away. He rode off into the sunset, believing beyond a shadow of a doubt that within no time Mary would be dead and that no one would ever know that he had anything to do with her. However, little did Lair Bear know that if he wanted someone that was going to be that easy to get rid of, he had very much picked the wrong girl. Yes, Mary was in horrible shape. She was losing so much blood, and she was totally and completely banged up and bruised from being thrown down a cliff. She had broken ribs. She was starting to go into shock, and she was freezing because she's still naked and it's nighttime at this point. So she certainly wasn't set up for success, but what she was a fighter, despite the fact that she was totally and completely exhausted, because of course she is. She and her body have just gone through unimaginable physical and mental and emotional trauma. So all she wanted to do was to go to sleep. She was so tired, and she just wanted to rest. But as she closed her eyes and she tried to go to sleep, she couldn't. She could not fall asleep because she could not tune out a voice in the back of her head that was telling her over and over again, repeatedly, do not go to sleep. Because if you do not get up and do something, he is going to do this to another girl. And despite how badly Mary wanted to ignore that voice and how badly she wanted to go to sleep, she couldn't. She might not have known exactly where that voice was coming from, but she did know that it was right. She knew that if this man got away with what he did to her, that it would only be a matter of time before he once again got the urge to do it to someone else. And so, fighting against every desire that she had to want to just lay there and wait to die, Mary instead mustered up every last bit of strength that she possibly could, and she crawled her way out of that culvert. She got herself out of the pipe, she got herself standing, and then somehow, even after everything that she had been through, this 15-year-old girl had the knowledge and the wherewithal to know that she needed to figure out a way to quickly stop her arms from bleeding. The problem was, obviously, that she's alone out in the middle of nowhere, and she doesn't have any clothes. She doesn't have like a belt or anything that she can try to use as a tourniquet. And actually, even if she had that stuff, she didn't have arms anymore. So how would she have even managed to fasten a makeshift tourniquet around her wounds if she did have like a belt or a shirt or something? So she's looking around and she's thinking and she's trying to figure out what she can do when all of a sudden it dawns on her that she's surrounded by dirt and mud. And while not ideal in the cleanliness realm, Mary realized that her best option was to just start shoving her arms down into this dirt and into this mud, effectively packing her wounds to the best of her ability until ultimately her bleeding did slow down and eventually it did stop. And again, this is just absolutely incredible. I cannot put into words how impressive this story is. How quickly Mary was able to think on her feet and to problem solve like that at just 15. I genuinely don't think that most adults could muster up as much strength or handle what Mary was going through with half as level of a head as she did. That said, though, stopping her bleeding, that was just step one, because now somehow with no arms and having lost like half of her blood, now Mary has to figure out how the hell she is going to manage to make it all the way back up this 30-foot like steep ass cliff. Now, personally, I'm weak. So from where I'm sitting, that sounds impossible. Mary, though, dude, I don't know how, but she did manage to drag herself all the way back from what seemed, I'm sure, like a bottomless pit all the way back to the top of this cliff. It wasn't a fast process, not by any means. I'm pretty sure it took her hours to do so. But regardless of how long it took her, the important thing is that she didn't give up, and ultimately that she was able to do it. Now, once Mary had gotten to the top of the cliff and she took a moment to sort of steady herself, and once she had taken a bit of a breather from this climb, she looked around and she realized that it was pitch black out. She could barely see even like a few feet in front of her. In later interviews, she's even gone on to say that if it hadn't been for the light from the moon and from the stars, she would have basically been blind. So of course, she stood there for a second, waiting and hoping that her eyes would adjust, when all of a sudden she heard traffic and cars whizzing by on what sounded like a nearby road. She wasn't exactly sure how close or far she was from this road, but she knew that if she could hear the cars, that at the very least she could follow the noise, and eventually, hopefully, she would find her way to the road and to safety. So she walked and 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 she walked, actually walking so long that the sun started to come up again before she finally saw the road that she had heard. And as she got closer and closer, she could actually hear that cars were approaching. So she got ready to try her best to flag them down. But as this first car approached Mary and they saw her standing there naked and waving what was left of her arms, screaming for help, the two guys in this little red convertible, they drove right past her. And I know that we've talked about this. I think it was in the Alice in Botha video. But you want to be mad at these guys, because how on earth could you just abandon someone like Mary in the state that she was clearly in? But then Mary herself has even said that she must have looked so scary to someone that wasn't expecting her and that didn't know what she had been through. So as frustrating as it was, even Mary doesn't fault those guys for driving past her. It was still a massive gut punch, though. Because, I mean, if they didn't stop to help her, who's to say that anyone was going to? So having that car pass by her, it did make Mary lose some of her hope. She had come so far, and yet somehow she was still going to end up just dying out here, all because everyone was going to be too afraid to pull over and to help her. At least that was her train of thought. Thankfully, though, not too long after the first car drove past her, Mary heard a second car approaching. This time it was a really old, really beat up looking truck, and as Mary began calling for their help and waving them down, thankfully this car did stop for her. This couple was actually on their honeymoon at the time that they stumbled across Mary, and they had gotten turned around somewhere. Basically, they were never actually meant to be on this specific road, at least not according to their itinerary. But as far as fate was concerned, well, I'll leave that up to your interpretation. Regardless of how you want to look at that, though, the couple got lost. They ended up on this road that Mary was on by accident, and ultimately, they ended up playing a role in saving this young girl's life. They pulled over immediately when they saw her. They got out, they grabbed her, they helped her into the truck before they then took off away from that area, just hightailing it to the nearest place that they could find a phone. Because remember, it's the 70s, so cell phones, they ain't have them. Once Mary and the couple got to a phone, they called emergency services, and Mary was ultimately taken by helicopter to the nearest hospital that was equipped to take on such an extensive case. Because at this point, Mary was in rough shape, so she was going to need very experienced doctors and very specialized medical personnel to address everything that she had going on. But somehow, miraculously, despite losing half of her blood and despite the other half, the half she did keep, basically turning into poison because it got so tainted and became so toxic, and despite being thrown from a cliff and left to die, Mary survived. She survived her surgeries. She survived her procedures. Even with every possible odd stacked against her, this 15-year-old girl defied each and every one of them. And despite Lawrence Singleton thinking he had killed her, she had survived. Sadly, though, while the worst was mostly behind her, because she had survived, she was now the key witness in this investigation. Police were going to have to rely heavily on her and her memories in order to hopefully catch this man that was responsible for doing these horrible things to her. And while, yes, she had fought to survive for this very reason, to make sure that this man could never do this to anyone ever again, that did not mean that participating in this investigation was not incredibly difficult for Mary. She had been through so much trauma at the hands of this man. So initially, when police bombarded her and started trying to ask her questions, she couldn't even answer them. Even the slightest tap back into the memories of what she had gone through, it sent Mary completely just spiraling. But again, this was exactly why she had fought so hard to live. So despite how difficult it was for her to relive what she had been through just over and over and over again, eventually it did prove very beneficial, because ultimately she was able to provide police with enough of a physical description for them to get a very detailed and almost chillingly accurate composite sketch of Lawrence drawn up. And within just shy of 2 weeks, Lawrence was identified by his neighbor, of all people, and on October 9th, 1978, he was officially arrested. He was brought into custody, and he was charged with the atrocities that he had carried out on poor Mary. Of course, he tried to deny having anything to do with everything that had happened to her, because don't they always? According to Lawrence, he had picked up Mary as well as 2 other male hitchhikers. He claimed that these guys' names were Pedro and Larry, which is hilarious because, like, you couldn't think of a single name other than Pedro and your own. I mean, it's really neither here nor there in the grand scheme of things, but, like, come on. Nevertheless, though, this idiot tells police that he picked up these 3 hitchhikers. He claims that they all stopped at a bar together to drink and do some drugs before, one by one, they then paid Mary for sex. So while, yes, he did admit to having sex with her, he argued that what had happened wasn't rape because it was, 1, consensual, and 2, because he had paid for it. Mind you, like I've said about a billion times, Mary was 15. She couldn't have consented to anything of that nature. So downplaying it or not, homeboy's already admitted to a crime. I don't know that he really understood what he was copping to at that moment, but either way, he told police that when he unloaded these 3 hitchhikers, that Mary was fine. He told them that he left her safely in the capable hands of Pedro and Larry. And I guess he wanted police to think that whatever had happened to her had to have happened at the hands of these other 2 gentlemen, and that he was just totally innocent. The problem with Lawrence's story, though, was that these guys, they didn't exist, and he's a moron. God, I wish I could have seen the look on his big, dumb face when he found out that Mary was still alive and that he was completely and totally screwed. Man, it had to be just such a satisfying look of like shock mixed with just, fuck. Still though, even with police clearly not buying what he was selling, and even with Mary as a living witness, despite the fact that she went on to pick him out of a lineup, Lawrence still went on to plead not guilty, and he opted to take his case to trial. So this meant that after everything she had already been through, poor Mary was going to have to sit in a room with this man, and she was going to have to go over everything that he had done to her in excruciating detail, all in front of dozens of people at that. And honestly, sometimes I think that this is why these offenders opt to take their cases to trial. Even in cases like this, where it's so obvious that they're not gonna win. Of course, yes, some people are stupid enough to think that they're gonna outsmart the system, but sometimes I think that they don't really care and that they just want to re-traumatize their victims, or they want to relive their crimes by hearing about them in grotesque detail like you would get in a trial. It makes me sick to think about it. Lawrence's trial began just a few months after his attack on Mary. Obviously, Mary was attacked in September, and I believe his trial began around March of 79. And let me tell you, that prosecution, they came out swinging. Not only did they have Mary's testimony and her identification of Lawrence, they also had the composite sketch as well, but police had also recovered Mary's cigarettes as well as some of her clothing from Lawrence's house. Because he's an idiot. He had tried to burn the clothing, but he hadn't been successful in fully disposing of it. So, of course, police collected it and they presented it at trial alongside everything else. So, like I said, they had a pretty strong case right from the outset. The defense, on the other hand, they didn't really have, so much to present in Lawrence's favor. Not that I think it would have mattered, because I'm assuming that after hearing Mary's testimony and after seeing her identify this man who attacked her without so much as a second thought, seeing her sitting there with her prosthetics and just being the living embodiment of the evil that this man was capable of. I don't personally think that there was anything that Lawrence's defense could have said after that could have ever managed to sway the jury's opinion. Poor Mary, though, God, after she testified, which was terrifying enough for this poor girl, not only did she have to sit there just 10 feet away from the man who had done all of these horrible things to her while she recounted all of them point by point. But then when Mary got off the witness stand and she was walking away from the stand and back towards the gallery area, just as she walks past where Lawrence was sitting, this evil man had the gall to look at Mary, and very quietly, so that only she could hear him, he said to her, and I quote, "If it is the last thing I do, I will finish this job." Oh my God, that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Just, what an unhinged, deranged maniac. I cannot. Thankfully, like I said, the jury was very moved by the prosecution's presentation, and they were even more moved by Mary and by her testimony and by her strength. So ultimately, Lawrence was found guilty of kidnapping, of mayhem, attempted murder, forcible rape, sodomy, and forced oral copulation. And those convictions sound great, right? That is a laundry list of things to be found guilty for. So they're going to lock him up and they're going to throw away the key, right? He's the state's problem now.
Wrong.
Unfortunately, according to California law at the time, Lawrence was only eligible to be sentenced to a maximum of 10 years for the attempted murder, plus a combined 4 years for the rape charges. So if you've done your math correctly, you now know that this monster, for kidnapping, raping, mutilating, and leaving this 15-year-old girl for dead, he was sentenced to 14 years. That is a slap in the face if I have ever heard one. Just so unbelievably disappointing. But, 14 years, it is 14 years, right? It's not technically nothing. It's certainly not great considering what he had done, but again, it's not nothing. So regardless of how we feel about it now, that was his sentence. So following his trial, he was carted off to San Quentin prison, where he would go on to serve his time. Meanwhile, as Lawrence began his sentence, poor Mary, she was still dealing with all the ramifications of what he had done to her. She tried to move back and to live with her parents, and she tried to regain some semblance of normal, but sadly, her parents and her siblings, they just could not seem to get used to the new Mary. They started treating her differently, and they started acting really weird around her. Despite how hard she was trying to get back to normal, no one else around her seemed to be trying to make the transition smooth for her. And I cannot even begin to imagine just how difficult this must have been for her, because after what she had just been through and with how young she still was, I mean, she now has a completely altered way of life to try to adjust to. This little girl, she should have had her parents, and she should have had her siblings to fall back on. They should have been there for her every step of the way, and they should have been her biggest support system. But instead, they were just weird. They made Mary feel uncomfortable in her own home, and they almost made her feel unwelcome. It was so bad that she started to distance herself from her family until ultimately she went completely no contact with them. She became completely estranged from the people that she once held nearest and dearest to her. And I know I keep saying it, but I cannot imagine how difficult this must have been for her, because even as she grew older and she did adjust to her new way of life, and as she learned how to live with and to manage her trauma, still, every single day in the back of her mind, Mary was terrified to her very core for the day that Lawrence would be released from prison. I mean, this lunatic had told her that he planned to finish the job. He basically promised her that someday he would track her down and he would try to kill her. So of course, she's going to have that fear lingering in the back of her mind. And as each day passes, she's going to know that she's one day closer to the day that he's released and potentially to the day that he tries to make good on that promise. And yet she has no one to lean on during this time. Ugh, and with how short of a prison sentence he was giving, my God, when it comes to something like that, 14 years is gonna pass in the blink of an eye. And that's if he had actually had to serve the full 14 years, because, spoiler alert, he didn't. Lawrence was actually released from prison after serving just 8 years for what he had done to Mary, which was barely over half the time that he was initially sentenced. And that first sentence was a joke. So the idea that they let him out even a day early is absolutely absurd to me. And obviously, this news would have been devastating to Mary no matter when she found it out. But you want to know something that really sucks? You know, when Mary found out that Lawrence Singleton had been released, one of her guests told her about it on her wedding day. Yeah, this was supposed to be one of the happiest days of Mary's life. Probably more so than even for most people, because of just how close she came to never getting to experience a wedding day. And yet, somehow, this monster who has already taken so much from her, somehow he manages to make a permanent mark on her wedding day as well. Oh, it's sick that by doing what he did, this man managed to imprint himself on and to alter and to affect so many important days and important periods in Mary's life. Lawrence was released, I believe, in April of 1987, and most of the official reasons that you'll find say that he was released early due to good behavior, to work credits, and to time served prior to his sentencing. However, it was more so due to overcrowding within the prison system than it really was to anything else, at least in my opinion. Basically, Lawrence was part of a program while he was in prison that gave him the opportunity to work while he served his time. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Make good use of him, whatever. But Essentially, in exchange for this work, rather than like an attaboy or pennies on the dollar like most inmates get, Lawrence worked as a teacher's aide, and in return for each day that he spent working this job, the prison shaved a day off of his sentence. Is that not absolutely, completely bananas?
That is the stupidest f***ing thing I've ever heard.
Now, to clarify, I think programs like this, they have a place. 100%, absolutely. I am definitely a proponent for prison reform. I absolutely understand that overcrowding is one of the many, many, many flaws in our prison system. But are we fucking kidding that we think that this is the kind of guy that deserves to be able to work to shorten his sentence? Theft, drug charges, fraud, property crimes, anything non-violent, fine, whatever. I don't care. But this man brutally raped a 15-year-old girl before he cut both of her arms off with a hatchet and left her for dead. What do you say? Maybe we let this one ride his sentence out. It has always blown my freaking mind when they release people like this under the guise of good behavior. Oh, wow. You mean he was well behaved in a setting where he was forced to behave well? This man is a danger to women. So no wonder he wasn't a problem in a male prison surrounded by 0 women. And it's not like he was regretful or showed any remorse for what he did to Mary literally ever. I mean, we know that he lied about having anything to do with what had happened to her. So that right there shows a lack of accountability. We know that he threatened Mary that he was going to finish the job. So that shows that he's definitely aggressive. Not like we didn't know that before, just based off of what he had done to her in the first place. But on top of all of that, as if the other stuff wasn't bad enough, shortly before Lawrence was released, he underwent a psychiatric evaluation that ultimately concluded, quote, "He is so out of touch with his hostility and anger, he remains an elevated threat to others' safety inside and outside of prison." And still, knowing this, they let him go. They let him waltz right out of prison like it was nothing.
I'm done. Cut the show.
Now, understandably, the reactions to his release were overwhelmingly negative. The prosecutor who'd worked on Mary's case referred to his early release as a great travesty and a miscarriage of justice. San Diego Supreme Court Judge Earl Moss denounced the decision, stating, quote, "If I had the power, I would send him to prison for the rest of his natural life." And Stanislaus County Deputy District Attorney Donald Stahl expressed his disgust with Lawrence's release, as well as with the program that granted it to him, by stating, quote, "Put simply, this program cuts all prison terms in half. It was quietly enacted as an effort to reduce prison overcrowding and in effect to cut loose people who should not be cut loose." Yeah, pretty much the only person that I could find to ever speak out in favor of Lawrence's early release was his own former defense attorney. This man's name was Robert Grimes, and when asked to comment on Lawrence's early release, he stated, quote, "I don't think he is ever going to get in serious trouble again. The attack on Mary Vincent resulted from an extremely unusual set of circumstances." And basically what he meant by that was that because Lawrence was allegedly like hella drunk when he attacked Mary, I don't know, I guess that should absolve him of his responsibility, at least according to this guy.
Oh, hell no.
Yeah, Grimes said that because Lawrence was drunk at the time of the attack, that he was acting out of his typical character. Do me a favor and remember that, okay? Remember that this guy said that Lawrence would not get in any serious trouble again, and that his attack on Mary was a one-time, out-of-character phenomenon. Spoiler alert, homeboy gonna be snacking on them words later. For now, though, Lawrence is out of prison, which is completely absurd, but, you know, we move on. What was funny about his release, though, relatively speaking, of course, but no matter where Lawrence tried to settle in California following his release, as soon as the community he was trying to infiltrate found out that he was there, they took to the streets, okay? They mobilized. Nowhere would have this man, all right? No one would accept him as their neighbor. No one wanted him as part of their community, 'cause duh. But I need you to understand that this man was so hated. and he was so rejected by society that even once he was released from prison, he ended up living in a trailer back on San Quentin's grounds because he could not find anywhere in California that would not chase him out mob style as soon as he got there. And he couldn't leave California since he was on parole, but the people of California chewed him up and they spit him back out like the rotten sack of filth that he was. So while sure, he was technically free, he still ended up having to serve his entire parole right outside the prison. Then after his parole was over, clearly knowing that he was not welcome in California, Lawrence then went on to hightail it back to his home state. So he went from his little trailer on San Quentin's property, basically immediately back to Tampa. Again, though, much like in California, when word started to spread that he was back, people were pissed, and rightfully so. Just like he did when he was first released, Lawrence had a lot of trouble finding somewhere to live that he was not immediately ostracized from and forced out of. He had to move around a bunch of times before he finally found a tiny little community that he somehow managed to disappear into without too much pushback. Now, before I move on, I do have to say, because it's feeling heavy on my heart, I do believe that in a lot of cases, rehabilitation is possible. Like, I truly believe that. But when it comes to someone like Lawrence, someone who sexually victimized a young girl before barbarically mutilating her in the way that he did, I'm sorry, that is not something that you just do on a random Wednesday and then you move on completely normally from. In my opinion, if you have that in you, the ability to do something like that, there is something so much darker and so much more sinister festering beneath the surface. Someone that can do that is just evil. Plain and simple. That is not the kind of thing that you can rehabilitate out of someone, especially not in just 8 short years. But if you disagree, which I doubt anyone does, but if there is any idea in your mind that maybe this guy did have remorse, or maybe he does regret what he did, try this one on for size. When this man got out of prison, which he is fucking lucky that he ever did. Let's acknowledge that. But once he was free, this man had the audacity and the gall to sue Mary. Yeah, you heard that correctly. After everything that he has already put her through in life, he decided to pile on top of it by dragging her through a lawsuit claiming that she had forcibly kidnapped him for the purposes of robbery. Yeah, there is no low that this gutter parasite won't sing to. Obviously, this suit was wildly unsuccessful, because of course it was. However, infuriated by the fact that he had tried to sue her at all, Mary then turned around and she filed her own lawsuit against him, which she won. Yeah, he was ordered to pay her a cool $2.5 million. Frustratingly though, while yes, that sounds great, old boy did not have a dollar to his name. So there was no way that he was going to be able to pay her back even a fraction of that money. I think when all was said and done, he ended up paying her like maybe a couple $100. The only thing I can say about that is that I don't really think Mary was ever in it for the money necessarily, as much as she was in it for the accountability. Don't get me wrong, the money would have helped her tremendously because by this point, she was struggling a lot in life. Her marriage had fallen apart, her finances were a complete disaster. She could no longer afford to keep up on the medical care that she so desperately needed because of what this man had done to her. This wasn't just something that happened to Mary when she was a teenager that she got over and moved on from. What this man did to her affected her daily, multiple times a day, in every conceivable way. Even years later, she spent each and every day in fear of Lawrence, just wondering if or when he would either make good on his promise to finish her off. She worried if he would come and he would try to hurt her children, or if he would try to hurt her family in some sort of other way. And of course, taking herself out of the equation completely, she also still worried daily about if he would ever try to hurt another woman the way that he had hurt her. And sadly, my friends, that fear, that ultimately was the one that came to fruition. And that brings us to February 1997. Roxanne Hayes was a 31-year-old mother to 3 children. Sadly, she had had an incredibly difficult life, and she was certainly more down on her luck than not at this point in our story. She had suffered unimaginable abuse growing up from both her grandfather as well as from her alcoholic father. So she had ended up leaving home and striking out on her own when she was just like 14 or 15 years old. And unfortunately, as it so often does, this led Roxanne to fall victim to addiction, which she then turned desperately to work in order to fund. But even given what Roxanne had been through in life, she was still a really, really kind and really caring person who always made sure that her children were taken care of. She would not spend a dime of money on herself before she knew that they had everything that they needed. Sure, she may have had her vices, but she worked her ass off to make sure that her children never went without. And unfortunately, in working so hard to ensure that her children were taken care of, this was how Roxanne ultimately came into contact with Lawrence Singleton. It was February 19th, 1997, when Roxanne got into Lawrence's van, thinking that she was just going to go and make some quick money and then go on about her life. However, as we know, women who get into Lawrence's van, they typically don't get to simply go on about their lives. At about 6 p.m. that evening, a neighbor of Lawrence's was walking past Lawrence's home when he happened to see through a window, a naked Lawrence, which would be shocking enough on its own because ill. But once the neighbor had processed that, he then noticed that the giant naked Lawrence was standing over a naked young woman whom he was mercilessly beating. And seeing this, the neighbor knocked furiously on Lawrence's window to try to get him to stop what he was doing, but almost as if he was in a daze, Lawrence just looked up at him, he shrugged him off, and he just kept on with what he was doing. Truly, it is absolutely terrifying and downright chilling that this man knew that someone had seen what he was doing, but that he was so committed to what he was doing to this poor woman that he didn't care. And sadly, by the time police arrived, they discovered Lawrence still naked. However, now he was absolutely covered in blood. Again, just like with Mary, he tried to explain everything away. He tried to say that the blood was his and that he had cut himself while he was cooking and blah, 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 blah. But quite literally, all it took was just looking behind him, because right there, still in the middle of the living room floor, lie an unresponsive Roxanne. She was beaten and she was battered. She had clearly been strangled, and she had also clearly been stabbed multiple times. And ultimately, because of these injuries, Roxanne Hayes would lose her life at the hands of Lawrence Singleton. This well-known, dangerous, and violent man who was so easily able to cut his prison sentence for his violent rape and attempted murder in half, only to go on to 10 years later do it all again, just like his attorney swore he wouldn't. Lawrence was obviously arrested right then and there, and he was charged for the murder of Roxanne Hayes. Again, never taking accountability for anything, he tried to justify what he had done to Roxanne by claiming that she had tried to rob him, but nobody at this point was buying anything that this Neanderthal was trying to sell them. Ultimately, he was found guilty of Roxanne's murder, and this time he was sentenced to death. However, regretfully, this judgment would prove to be too little too late, because just 4 years later, in 2001, Lawrence would succumb to cancer, and he would pass away naturally at the age of 74. And Mary, this was so conflicting and so confusing to her. At first, she was low-key kind of pissed that he had the audacity to die on his own before the state could carry out his sentence. But eventually, knowing that he was gone and that he was no longer a threat to her or to her children, she did end up coming to terms with his early demise. You know, it is just a real crying shame that he managed to take a woman's life before his stupid body decided to quit. As for Mary, she did ultimately go on to remarry. She's Mary McGriff now. She and her husband are still happily married. They've gone on to become grandparents, and they really are just living and enjoying their lives. After surviving an attack that would have broken most people, Mary refused to let her story end in tragedy. Instead, she went on to reclaim it piece by piece. Despite losing both of her arms, she painstakingly rebuilt her life, learning how to write, to eat, to draw again, all with the help of prosthetics that she personally engineered. And once she could draw again, her passion for art, it didn't just return, it thrived. Mary's art is vivid and it's powerful, and it speaks to both her pain and her resilience. And beyond just her personal life, Mary also went on to begin publicly sharing her story. She became a powerful and a well-respected victims' rights activist. Of course, we know that she bravely testified at her own trial against Lawrence, but she also went on to testify against him in the trial for Roxanne's murder. She chose to sit there face to face with him again, almost 2 decades later. And again, she fearlessly pointed him out as the disgusting and depraved monster that he was. Since then, she has stood on stages across the country, pushing against leniency for violent crimes and demanding more appropriate sentencing. Her visibility and her strength have become a beacon of proof that even the deepest wounds can heal with just a bit of grit and a lot of determination. More than anything, though, Mary has shown that survival isn't just about making it through the worst days of your life, but it's about transforming your hurt into hope, not just for yourself, but also for others who may someday need it. And with that, you guys, we are about wrapped for today. First and foremost, I want to say rest in peace to poor Roxanne. Because Mary's part of the story is so extensive, I truly feel like oftentimes her death tends to get overlooked, which is an incredible shame. Because her lifestyle and her life weren't picture perfect, she wasn't like a pristine housewife with nary a flaw, the media has really painted her out almost as if she deserved what happened to her back then. It's either that or they label her as the prostitute that Lawrence killed, which is vile. This woman, Roxanne Hayes, she had a name and she had a life. She had kids. She had a fiance. She was so unbelievably young and she had so much life left to live when it was stolen from her by this monster who frankly never should have been out of prison to have a chance to harm her in the first place. Again, I wish that I could tell you more about her. I really do. There really is not that much available. What I do know, though, is that she was kind, she was loving, she was smart, and her kids have said that she was an amazing mother, and her fiance has said that she was an amazing partner. She has been missed dearly by them for close to 30 years now, and it all happened because the system decided that this horrible man only needed a slap on the wrist. Truly, it is gut-wrenching. Mary fought and she fought to stay alive so that she could ensure that Lawrence would never have the chance to hurt another person. But because of the sentence that they gave him, it was almost as if California scoffed in the face of what Mary had been through. And then, because of that, another innocent woman died at the hands of this ingrate. Just absolutely devastating and infuriating, and I don't know, man. It's an all-around bummer. So, yeah. Let me know what you guys think about this case in the comments down below. As always, I thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and to listen to this story. If you have a case or a topic you'd like to see me cover, please fill out the case submission form that I have linked down in the description. And if by chance you're interested in anything about today's makeup, I will also make sure to have all of the links and the product information listed down there for you as well. If you haven't already and you'd like to, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I put out new videos every week, but if you turn on your post notifications, you'll always be notified when I do post, and you'll always always be sure to catch me back here in my next one. Until then, though, stay safe and have a good week. Bye! And she hitchhiked her with the... And this time he was sentenced to... And I guess he wanted to... We're doing a gruesome get ready with me. Uh-oh. Of it all. Visitor... Influenced by local car clubs. Oh, fuck. Hitchhiker... Who's Googling that? That's crazy. So that's insane. Today's makeup. I will also make sure to have all of the products of